feeling the effects of the shutdown. Washington, D.C. back in business for now. President Trump will give his State of the Union address on February 5th, Tuesday. The address was originally supposed to be today. Even though the shutdown is over, the U.S. is still feeling the effects. New numbers from the Congressional Budget Office to report. The U.S. GDP will be $3 billion lower during the fourth quarter of 2018 because of this shutdown. On the immigration front, backlogs of immigration courts grew by at least 10%, according to the Wall Street Journal. Joining us right now to talk more about all of that is Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist. Grover, good to see you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So the CBO is talking about a $3 billion hit. In fact, as a result of the shutdown, Larry Kudlow is having an issue with this. He says he frequently disagrees with the CBO anyway. What's your take in terms of what the shutdown cost the economy?
Well, the key thing is that the economy continued to grow, and we're looking at a 3% rate of growth for the year. So $3 billion is a big number unless you compare it to the GDP of the United States in the fourth quarter. So actually, we're doing fairly well.
You don't think it had much of an impact then, Grover?
No, it's a small impact, and we have a tremendous growth for the year, which is way beyond what the CBO said was possible when they scored this. The CBO needs to spend a little more time going back to explain why they were so wrong on all of their recent predictions. So
there you go. Go ahead.
Grover, the Federal Reserve and most of the economists that we survey at the Wall Street Journal are saying that the economy is slowing down in 2019. We had a nice burst in 2018, in part because of tax cuts, in part because there's more spending, $300 billion of additional spending. But now they say the economy is slowing along with the global economy. What does that say about the impact of these tax cuts? Have the tax cuts really created the long-run growth that Republicans said was going to happen?
The tax cuts do two things. We were at 35% rate, which is the highest in the world. It made sense for an American company like Burger King to be bought by a Canadian company because even though they're selling the same hamburgers, the same number of employees, it was worth more because we had a worldwide tax system at 35%. By taking 35 down to 21, we became competitive with Europe. Our friends, the Germans, were at 25. The Japanese were at 25. The Japanese were at 30. The Chinese were at 25, and we were at 35. We weren't even close to being competitive. It's a huge change in the direction for the country. And if the CBO tells you they're pessimistic, they didn't think you could do 3%. They laughed at 3% growth. Said you could never do more than 2%.
But the question is that 3% growth? I think a lot of people understand that the corporate tax rate was uncompetitive. Even some Democrats wanted to lower that corporate tax rate. But the question is, this new tax code that we've got, is that sufficient to sustain a 3% growth in 2019?
It's a good first start. We also need to do something about the workforce. We need more workers. And frankly, there's more tax reduction that needs to be done. And spending restraint is very important at the end of the day.
I want to go back to this question about a shutdown, Grover, which is people are saying they're almost using the reason why you couldn't cut government because somehow that would have a negative impact on our economic growth. That seems like a very dangerous road to go down. Isn't it true that all this money that they're saying didn't get put into the economy? Are you worried that the government actually won't spend all that by the time that the authority over the money expires?
Look, for the government to, I was taught this Keynesian economics in college also. If the government takes your money and then spends it, it's much better for the economy than if it lets you spend it.
Right.
Because you would waste some of it by investing it.
Because they can spend money better than you, of course. Right.
And that's the oddest thing, because of course that's nonsense. East Germany should have done very well under this theory, but it doesn't. So
what the government is doing is borrowing other people's money and spending it, right? I mean, we're talking about deficits that are nearing $1 trillion.
Well, the deadweight cost of government is how much the government spends. Whether they borrow it or take it, it's still gone from the real economy. The cost of government is total government spending. We should have taxes low and in the least destructive way possible. All taxes are somewhat destructive. And you have less borrowing if you have less spending.
So what about all of these new plans? And by the way, we are getting earnings right now as we're talking. 3M and Xerox both beat expectations, although 3M is cutting its forecast for the year. What about all these ideas about taxing the wealthy? New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling for a 70% marginal tax rate on the tippy top, as she calls it. Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts Senator, hopeful for 2020. 2% tax on Americans whose assets exceed $50 million. If you're a billionaire, 3%. What's the impact? impact?
Okay, magicians like to do this, so you're not looking at, watch my right hand, don't look at the left hand.
Right.
The reason they talk about high tax rates on rich people is that they want to gouge the middle class. The difference between the United States and Sweden, Finland, Denmark, the countries that Cortez talked about, is they don't have a 70% rate. Just back up for a sec. There isn't a country in the world with a 70% income tax rate. Many countries used to. The Beatles song, 19 for me, 1 for you, a 95% tax rate, and then the Beatles moved to the United States. And everybody who could play tennis left Sweden. And all the countries of the world realized that tax rates that high were stupid and destructive and didn't help equality or growth or anything like that. So they got rid of them. The whole world got rid of them. We did it. It was stupid. We backed off it and had strong economic growth as a result. So 70% stupid and it's destructive. It's not America saying that. The world says that.
Yeah, you probably saw the op-ed today in the Journal on California and taxes as well. The Journal this week by Cypress founder T.J. Rogers, which was very good. Another California tax grab, he writes. In it, the politicians have fueled an affordability crisis that drives away businesses and exacerbates homelessness. California Governor Gavin Newsom called for even higher taxes in his inauguration speech earlier this month.
Well, California is a good example of the 70% play. They have a 13% rate on people who make $1 million, but they have an 8% rate on people who make $42,000. So they want the middle class people in California to think, you're okay, because we're really screwing the other guy. In point of fact, Florida has a 0% personal income tax. Texas has a 0% personal income tax. 8% looks good compared to 13.
Yeah.
Looks lousy compared to 0%. They want the middle class to think somebody else is paying the freight. That's why they have those phony high tax rates that don't raise much money. It's to fool the middle class.
And it's a talking point, and it works for the populace. Let me bring in Dagan McDowell on this, because we hear this every time we go into the tax discussion, and we have a Democrat on, which takes out another one of those talking points on taxes, Dagan.
Right. And I want to say that Senator Kamala Harris said that the first thing, she said it last night in the town hall, the first thing she'd do is to cut taxes for the middle class. Well, roughly half this country pays no net federal income tax, number one, and the Republicans just did that, particularly doubling the standard deduction. So I don't know who she's going to cut taxes for, but this is the ruse, and this is the big liberal lie, that all of these big new welfare state initiatives, whether it's green energy, even single payer, it's all going to be paid for by the super rich, and that it's not going to be that the pain won't be spread across every person in this country to fund this welfare state.
And by the way, the numbers don't add up. No. Even if you tax all the rich, you're not going to get the amount of money you need for this Green Deal, Grover.
You don't even balance the budget if you do that. Never mind have money for new things. Look, the big difference between the United States and Denmark, the United States and Sweden, is not how much money higher income people pay. It's what happens to middle income people. Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the tax rate on middle income people is 10, 15, 20 points higher than an American middle class person. Mm-hmm. And you add to that the value added tax.
Yep.
The difference between the United States and Europe is how heavily taxed middle income people are. And they have those pretend high rates that very few people pay to make people in the middle class think that they're getting a deal.
Speaking of middle income taxes, a lot of Democrats want a carbon tax, a gasoline tax, and even some big American businesses say that's the way to address the issue of climate change. Do you see any path towards a carbon tax that it would be acceptable to your point of view?
It's not going to generate enough either, I guess. But real quick, Grover.
No, absolutely not. And the reason is you can look at Washington State, very deep blue Washington State. They've twice had it on the ballot and twice defeated a carbon dioxide tax. Gasoline taxes lose overwhelmingly. This is a too obvious tax on middle income people. It's a loser. They're having this fight in our dear friends in France, or at loggerheads on the subject.
Well, we know how that played out.
Had the Ontario government and the Alberta government collapse as a result of this, and 3 times in Australia.
Bad politics,
Grover,
bad
thank
economics.
you. Yeah.
Bad politics and lousy economics.
Grover, thank you for the facts.